Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about A Murder at the End of the World, Episode 1. It's called Chapter 1, Homme Fatale. So, this is the new show from FX slash Hulu. It's the Brit, Marling, and Zal, I'm going to butcher his name here, Zal Batman Jill? I mean, he's got Batman in his name, so that's kind of cool. But this is the team that did the OA on Netflix, I believe, some years ago. And I was very into that show. So when I heard there was going to be a new miniseries, a new limited series coming from them, I was intrigued. I intentionally did not look at any trailers. I just dove into it without even knowing what the premise was. The only thing I knew was the title and the creators behind it. And that was it. And I went in cold. So, episode 1 and 2 both came out today, and originally I was going to watch both episodes and just talk about them as like a double premiere, but to be honest, this first episode was 70 minutes long, and as I was getting towards the end of it, I felt like I got such a full course of an episode that I felt it would be a disservice to both of the episodes by squishing them together, because inherently it always leads to just not getting as much focus on either one every time. So episode 2 I've not watched. I'll start with some spoiler free thoughts. I will then give you a warning, and I will do spoilers for just the first episode. Episode 2 I will watch and discuss probably at the weekend, I think, so it's out in time for episode 3 next week. It's a 7-episode show, so there's 5 left after these first 2, but I'll get to episode 2 later in the week. But the basic premise of this is that it's a young woman named Darby Hart who has written a book, a true crime book based on a murder that she investigated, sort of kind of illegally, kind of amateur illegal kind of sleuth stuff, and has written a book, and the show delves into that. But the big plot sort of thrust, that's sort of the backstory of the character, but the big plot thrust of the story is that she's invited to this mysterious retreat by a tech billionaire played by Clive Owen for unknown reasons, right? It's very mysterious. Even by the end of episode 1, like, there's some reasons that are kind of given, but I'm not so sure if they're the true reasons, and that'll be something we talk about, I think, throughout this. But that is the basic gist of it, and the title does imply there's going to be a murder. There's murder in the backstory as well, which I'll get into. I think the first thing that stuck out to me about this is that the OA had a lot of characters telling stories. In particular, the lead character, who Brit Marling herself played on that show, was telling a story over the course of the entire first season. So every single episode would pretty much start with stuff in present day, but then once she started telling the story, it would switch over to the story for the rest of it. Now, this isn't doing the same format, but the opening stuff of this episode is this young character, Darby, going to a book reading of her own book, and it sort of tries to subvert your expectations, because it looks like she walks in with her hood up and her headphones on, and it's almost meant to be a surprise that she's the one being called up to talk to the crowd. And they're not that interested at first, but then they kind of start to listen to her because the story sounds quite intriguing, investigating this murder that was unsolved for years, and her and this other guy named Bill were investigating it, and so on. And I'll get into all that more in depth in spoilers, but it reminded me a lot of the OA, because it very much started out with someone telling a story, and sure enough, once she starts recounting the story and reading from her own book, it goes into the backstory, and we get like the scenes playing out. And I thought those scenes were very good. That was where it really grabbed, like, the first few minutes are fine, but then it really started to grab my attention during this flashback stuff as the story's being told. I genuinely didn't know at this point if this was going to be the whole show. Because of the way the OA was framed, I thought this could literally be the whole show. It's her going to tell more of her book and more of her story over several nights, and this crowd maybe who'll become more like recurring characters that we get to know. Or is it, is this all going to be backstory stuff and this is the framing device, or is this just the backstory for the character and some really important stuff for who they are to set up before we go into the main story, which is it's seemingly what it actually is, because then the plot unfolds. But it devotes a good 20 minutes of this 70-minute runtime of this stuff before it kind of that comes to an end, and it's like, okay, time to continue in the present day, and then the plot plays out from there. I liked the first episode quite a bit, just to get that out of the way. Like I said, I was really drawn in. I think one of the things that the OA did surprisingly was have a very, very, I don't want to say scary, but a very intimidating villain. Someone who felt, and there's a moment in the backstory that is quite tense, and I was getting kind of flashes of that. It's very well directed. This episode is directed by Brit Marling as well, funnily enough. So she's playing a character in the show. She's not the main character, but she's playing a character in the show. She's the co-creator, co-writer, and I don't know if she's directed all the episodes, but she directed this one. So I thought the direction was really on point. It was doing a great job of making me feel tense in moments where that made sense, of making me feel a sense of wonder when that made sense. For example, when they arrive at the destination, I don't know if I should spoil where the destination is. I don't think it really is a spoiler necessarily, just to say which country they're in, but the visuals are very nice, and it's like, oh, hey, this is great. This feels kind of wondrous and all the rest of it. And then on top of that, it does a really good job, and this is both direction along with performances and the writing, but it does a really good job of seeding just character moments early on that make you feel something for the main character and the relationship that she has with someone else. And it does it in such a simple way. It very much feels par for the course. And I think the Brit Marling and Zal stuff, I don't know if Zal was with her when she did the movie After Earth. No, sorry, not After Earth. That's that Shyamalan movie with Will Smith. Another Earth is the movie I was trying to reference, because that's a Brit Marling movie. She's the lead character in that, and it very much has the tone that the OA had as well. And then I think similarly, this is kind of veering into that same kind of stuff. And I think I've realized that I really like their work. There's something kind of wonderfully, I don't know, like, I think if someone said that this is a bit too indie movie for them, I would kind of understand what they mean by that, but it's a very delicate balance where I think it really works for me, where they'll have fun with the little tricks they use and the little moments they use where there's characters listening to a song for quite a good a good couple of minutes, like a good bit of the song plays where there's two characters listening to a song, and it's the sort of thing you expect in kind of an indie movie that's maybe a little quirky but is doing like more in-depth drama and character study stuff, and less so a blockbuster or anything like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is very much an acquired taste, and it's not going to work for everyone. But I really liked Another Earth when I saw it, and I was really drawn in and loved just how unapologetically, what's the word, artistic? I mean, that's not even the right word. I love how unapologetically this is their story, right? This does not feel watered down and sort of focus group testy to be appealing to the widest possible demographic. This does not feel like it's just popcorn for shoveling down for entertainment. This feels like creative people who have got a vision and are unrelenting in it being what they want it to be. And I think that's not going to work for everyone, but I think for the people that this does click with, and I include myself in this, it clicks really hard because it feels like it's truly theirs. And that's not to say that it's completely flawless or completely perfect by any means, right? I'm not saying that by any stretch, but something about the characters in the world that they create, even when something that out of context seems quite silly happens, it kind of works in the show. It works, and the OA had moments like that. And nothing silly really happens in this episode. I'm just kind of broad picture of the Brit Marling stuff. Yeah, I like this a lot. I thought the direction was strong. I thought the story is intriguing so far. What is it really about so far? I don't know. I have no idea what it's really about. I feel like there's more to reveal. Obviously, there's certain themes and ideas that are brought up in here. I'll talk about them once we get into the spoilers. but it feels like there is maybe more of a purpose. It wasn't, it was hard not to think a little bit about Knives Out. Not Knives Out, the second one, Glass Onion, the billionaire inviting everyone, and I was thinking, this feels like it's got a little bit of that going on. Not in tone, don't get me wrong. This movie does not tonally feel anything like that, but just in the idea of like this billionaire inviting all these people out, super tight security to a remote region, and what are his intentions? Why are they all here? He gives a reason in this episode. I'm not convinced that's the real reason. I'm not convinced that there's not more to it. I suspect that there is. So, yeah, all that's super intriguing. I enjoyed the performance. Emma Corrin, who plays Darby, I think is very strong in this episode. I believe they go by they. At least I think I read that. But so they remind me a lot, bizarrely, of a young Jodie Foster. There's just a lot of times where they have like just a little facial expression, particularly the way their mouth kind of like emotes, I guess, just reminded me a lot of Jodie Foster. Particularly, like Silence of the Lambs era Jodie Foster, where I'm imagining like Foster talking to Hannibal Lecter and like just the way she's trying to look confident, but she isn't really. There was a lot of those vibes coming from the performance to me. Brit Marlin's in here. I mentioned Clive Owen, who obviously is a big get. Joan Chen's in here, which is a wild name to just sort of randomly see here, because I know her from one thing, and that one thing is Twin Peaks. And she left that show in spectacular fashion, wanting to have a movie career during its second season. And I've maybe like seen her in like one movie in the 90s or something after that, but pretty much like off the map as far as I'm concerned. It's entirely possible though that she's had a great career maybe doing movies in China or something like that, and I've just not, like, I just don't know what they are. But it's just wild to see that name pop up. Alice Braga I recognize from just a couple of small roles here or there. But for the most part, I don't recognize a lot of the other faces. I would say they're mostly new. Even Emma Corrin is new to me. I don't know them from anything else. By and large, though, I was enjoying performances. Much like the OA, it feels very much like, well, there's obviously a grounded in reality. It does feel like it's it's playing by the rules more or less. There's some technology that's a little advanced, which almost feels like science fiction, but maybe isn't that science fiction, depending on your perspective. The true crime stuff they're talking about, the some of the issues they're talking about. One of the big themes of the episode that comes up is climate change, and the title's kind of got like a double meaning there almost, in terms of what end of the world actually means. Like, is it the edge of the world or is it the end of the world as we know it, in terms of like things changing and whatnot. Anyway, I think I'll just have to say spoilers at this point, because I don't really know what else I can talk about without saying spoilers. So spoilers for episode 1. Just episode 1. I know episode 2 is already aired. Let me make that clear. This is only spoilers for episode 1, because I have not watched episode 2 yet. So episode 1, what do I want to talk about first? I mean, do we talk about the fact that Clive Owen's billionaire character wants to save the world? Well, not even save the world, but like try and make the best choices they can, because climate change is about to kill lots of people over the next several decades, and all these things are going to happen. So he's assembled these great minds to try and think of good solutions to things and make the right choices, if you believe that's what they're really there to do. So you've got that big theme at play. But of course you're saying, well, why is Darby someone who wrote a true crime story here? Why is she here? She's wondering the same thing, quite frankly. There is one obviously small connection, of course, that she thinks has to do with why she's there, and that's that when she was doing her book reading, she dedicated her book to Lee, who is Brit Marling's character, who is married to Clive Owen's character, right? She apparently was one of the first ever, or one of the most known female coders and hackers, or whatever, in this world. And she was apparently doxxed and treated very poorly by the internet for being that. Darby seems to admire or even idolize her. That's the gist we get anyway. It feels like she might idolize her. And that's why she ultimately accepted to come to this trip, is because she knows she might meet Lee and she idolizes her. And there's an implication even that Lee might have been the one who actually chose her based on what they maybe heard about what she said, or maybe even just the dedication in the book outright. The plot thickens in some ways as well, which I'll get into, but we've got that at play. So there's that thing. But then you've got the... So part of the reason why I was thinking of Glass Onion was because part of me was thinking that there was going to be a murder and that they've intentionally invited Darby because they want to see if she can crack the case, if she can solve it or figure it out. And maybe I'm just grasping at straws with that, I don't know, but I was getting those kind of vibes at one point. Anyway, let me go back to the start. There's actually so much in this episode that I feel like I have to kind of roughly just go through in order. So we're introduced to Darby. She's at a book reading and she's explaining some context for how she wrote this book or how she ended up being who she is. She tells us that her father was a coroner in the small town she grew up in, and she knew a lot about dead bodies and murder victims because of that. And when she was young, she hacked into the federal database of missing people, or not even missing people, sorry, of unidentified bodies, of bodies that are Jane Doe's or John Doe's. But one of the big things she found out is that the vast majority of unidentified bodies are women. That immediately was like, okay, that feels like a theme that you're giving me right here early on. We're talking specifically between the fact that we're bringing up that most murder victims, especially the unidentified ones that will never go answered, are women. You're also talking about the first woman coder who was doxxed off the internet for daring to play in the boys' world. And there's other conversations later on that kind of tap into the idea of gender roles, of just of that kind of thing. Like I'm trying to like juggle multiple later scenes in my head as I'm kind of going through this. So she explains this as backstory, and then she talks about how her and this guy she met online named Bill had somehow, after lots of research, she doesn't go into specifics here, maybe we'll get more specifics in this down the line, because I suspect there'll be more flashbacks later on to more of this time period. And you can tell instantly that we're in a different time period when she starts reading from the book and we see her at this earlier age. She has different hair. She has like longer brunette hair, whereas she has like short dyed blonde or pink hair and all the present day stuff. So it's very clear that we're in a different time period. We're introduced to her and Bill, and they're arguing about where or to go through with this, because they've tracked down the house that they believe the killer of one particular body is, right? I can't actually remember if there was anything like special about the particular dead body and why they were investigating, but there was a dead body that she specifically focused on and wanted to find the killer of, and she named the victim the Silver Doe, which is what she also called her book, and believed it was like not just a single victim, it was one of many of some killer. And they have somehow tracked down the house they believe to have belonged to the killer, and they want to find evidence or possibly dead bodies buried underneath, kind of thing. So it's vacant right now, apparently, and they're going to go. But Bill's kind of starting to get the jitters. He's like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this. It's illegal. We're breaking in, so on, so on. She points out that he's driving a stolen car, and maybe that's like just a little character thing. Maybe that's something that's going to be more important later. I'm mentioning it, though, because the details stuck out to me. The big thing that stuck out here, though, is that there's a casual mention here, and I think this is really kind of interesting and smart writing, is that the show's given us enough context here to get kind of drawn into the thing they're about to do. And this is where I would say it's maybe just after this where the show really started to grab me. But I think one of the little tricks here that's quite smart is that she casually mentions, no, we can't go to the FBI because they won't want to believe it about one of their own. So there's a line here that implies that they believe the killer is actually someone who works in the FBI, or in law enforcement at the very least. So immediately, that's a cool little tidbit, but I think what's nice about it is that she says it in such a way that these two characters already know that, right? There's clearly a lot of research before this point for these characters, and we're sort of like teasing the audience with little bits of it, like throughout their conversations and things that we don't know yet. And I suspect we're going to find out more about as time goes on. And then the second big thing they do with these two characters, when seemingly when they're driving to the place, there's some conflict about whether or not they should go, but just to skip ahead, they're driving to the place and it's awkward. They're in the car, so she pulls out an iPod and she puts it on shuffle. And I think the name of the song is "No More I Love You." If that's not the name, you know what song I'm talking about. Do 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 do. That one, right? So it starts playing, and this is just like one of these little fun things where I think this is like a filmmaker's scene, because this is very much, we're going to have these actors be in a bad place at the start of this song, but over the course of the song, so Bill starts singing along and he says, "No, don't turn it off." She almost goes to turn it off because it's, this is a bit silly and maybe it doesn't fit the mood and whatever. But he's like, no, leave it on, and he starts singing along with it. And then by the time they get to the chorus, she joins in, and it feels like a really happy scene by the time it gets going. It's like there's this bonding that happens throughout, where they're having song makeup sex effectively over the course of this scene. And it's one of these things, it's just a really sweet scene that, without even giving us any like information about who these two are, it's telling us so much about the relationship they have, about how they fight and make up, and how he looks like he's this tough guy with tattoos when you first see him, but then he's singing along to this romantic song, and that kind of breaks her out of her shell. And that feels like that's also like thematically something we're going to be doing with these characters, and maybe why they appealed to each other in the first place. It feels like it's telling me so much, but it's very endearing. And by the time we get to the place they're going, I already found myself more invested in these two as characters. And I'm like, you know what? At this point, we're maybe 10 minutes into the episode, give or take. And I kind of knew, I'm like, okay, you know what? I think they've got me. I think the quality's clicking together. I think they have me now. I'm not waiting, because there's some pilots where they never hit that. Like, sometimes it takes shows episodes to hit that point. Sometimes it takes a whole season to hit that point. And you think it's good enough, but you're sort of going on the potential for a while until it and it's great when it does click together. But I think it's really special when and it has to when it's a limited series, admittedly, but quite early on, I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm in good hands. And I'm remembering why I like the OA so much, because it's such a good, strong handling of its tone and what it wants to be. And some people will not like some of these things that they do, like these two characters singing in the car together. But for me, it worked. And I instantly felt chemistry between them. I instantly felt this awkward romantic relationship that's kind of endearing. And I instantly didn't want anything bad to happen to either of them. And at this point in the episode, I legitimately thought this flashback was going to end with Bill dying. Because he's not around for the book reading and someone asked about him, I think, after this, I thought, oh, well, whatever happens in this backstory, he's going to end up dead. Obviously, later on in the episode, that turns out not to be the case. Oh, ironically, he seems to be dead by the end of the episode. But that was going through my head for a while. And then, of course, once they're all going to this fancy, retreat in Iceland, there was a click at one point where I'm like, oh, I bet Bill's there. If he's not dead, he's at that retreat, and it's going to be a big moment. And sure enough, it is a big moment when he just kind of casually walks into frame, or sits into frame, to be more precise. So I thought this opening was great, and it's them digging up the basement of this place. There's a funny little bit as well. Again, just a little endearing thing. It's like, hey, it's that thing where lots of movies and TV shows are trying to say, hey, this character's good at something, so we're going to show you the character be cool. In this case, it's hacking. So Darby's going to hack the garage door, which is like a smart door, and open it up so they can just drive into this house and then go and do what they're going to do. This is where we get a lot of the exposition about how cool she thinks Lee is and how she's this awesome person. Bill reacts and is like, oh, that's shit, what happened to her? He's kind of reacting to all. This is literally the first time he's ever hearing about her, which is interesting for later on in the episode when it seems like he's had some kind of relationship. Not necessarily romantic. I mean, it might be romantic, we don't know, but he seems to know her. In the time period for where his relationship with Darby ended and showing up at this retreat, there's some kind of relationship with Lee, and he only found out about her because of Darby. But yeah, they do this whole thing where she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to open the garage," and she's explaining how cool Lee is, and it's like, oh, she's about to prove that she's just as good as Lee is. And she kind of does. The door starts opening, but then they look down the street and realize that every garage door in the street is also opening. And that's quite suspicious, and people are going to notice. So they drive in quickly and, shut them all again. But it's just this sort of like, so sometimes when you're trying to present your character as just super cool and without flaws, and this is not like a big flaw, don't get me wrong, but it's just you're willing to kind of like say, oh, not everything's not perfect, and like they can screw up, right? I think that's just a nice little touch to me. But they spend the night digging into the concrete in the basement, and then they eventually notice that it's actually the stairs that look like they've been put back together with crappy wood. And sure enough, when they rip it apart, they find a skeleton in the ground. There's actually just a hole in the ground, like the concrete's missing in this part of the floor. So it's not even that good a cover-up job, to be honest. Like anyone could just rip these stairs apart. But the big ending to this comes when someone is upstairs and they come to the top of the basement stairs, which aren't there anymore. They've knocked the stairs away to get to this, this grave. And this figure, who we don't see who it is, we don't see the head, we just see a gun in the hand, and Bill steps in front of Darby, and that's where it just comes to an end. And we cut back to the book reading, and Darby's like, I can't do this. Well, she doesn't say that. She says, that's enough for one night. I can't really take any more. It's a pretty harrowing memory, you have to imagine. So I thought it's a good little short movie on its own, just to build to tension and like sort of, and it's I think it's so important for later in the episode that we have some connection to them as a pair. That seeing them just lie together after they've dug a hole of concrete, looking for a dead body, and the song in the car, just I think all these moments of these two oddball lovers coming together really sells how much of a big deal it is when he shows up later in the episode. I'm not saying it's surprising by that point. It's like I said, I expected it, but how it's handled when it does happen, and it has effect because we spent all this time in this flashback portion. There's so many TV shows that will spend countless scenes doing flashbacks and accomplish nothing with them. They're just doing flashbacks for the sake of flashbacks. This is serving purpose to how you feel later on in the episode. That's how it is supposed to work. And I really enjoyed that portion of the episode. So yeah, Darby goes home. After answering some questions, one guy who looks very well dressed, of course, turns out to be working for the billionaire later. But she gets a weird invitation to accept an app back at her home, and it's worth mentioning. This might not be super important, but her home is like, she's got like a big bolt thing in the door. It seems like she takes threats seriously, stuff like that. She doesn't live in like a nice part of the world, or a nice part of the city even. It's very much like, bolt the door up with all these different locks to make sure you feel some modicum of safety. But she gets this app from the rich guy, or at least from someone on behalf of the rich guy, and it's this like AI / augmented reality like voice who starts talking to her, but when she lifts up her phone to look, she can see this person standing there, but it's not a real person, it's just an AI that's talking to her, but invites her to this retreat. And she's basically not sure if she wants to for a bit. It's not until she talks to her dad on the phone in the morning that he's like, oh, I'm proud of you, you should go, you should absolutely go. And she agrees, and we get the awkward meeting of everyone on the plane, this private plane, and all the different types of people that's been invited to this. There's a filmmaker who happens to be reading Darby's book. He's fairly pleasant. There's a rich Asian woman who we find out later has built smart cities in China. We have Alice Braga's character, who is an astronaut or was a doctor, but is now like developing plans to colonize the moon. So it feels a little near future, even though there's not a lot of other fancy stuff. But the AI slash augmented reality butler dude plus, we're planning to colonize the moon feel just a little bit out in the future, just a bit. And there's a couple other characters. There's like a little tech guy and whatever. We get a sense of some of these other characters, and we get this, trip to Iceland. There is a quick sequence where Darby goes to sleep. She gets some pills from the other woman to go to sleep, and she has like a dream where she walks in to the bathroom, and it goes to a flashback of her walking in, and Darby's in the bathtub, kind of just in shock, seemingly saying, we could have died, or something like that. I can't remember the exact line, but it was clearly some shock after the events of whatever they went through in that house. We didn't get to see the ending to the house stuff. I assume we're going to, obviously, as we go forward in the show. But, of course, this is foreshadowing that she is going to see him again soon. And already it came up actually, the director guy was asking her, hey, like, this guy who's in the photo in the back with you, isn't that guy who's like this underground artist, this graffiti artist? I think he goes by Fangs now. And she's like, yeah, that's him. I knew him as Bill, but yeah, that's him. So it's like, okay, so he isn't dead, right? That was the confirmation. It's like, okay, he's not dead, but he's went away and, had this other life. And I don't remember where in the episode it comes after this, so I'll just say it now. There's another flashback that shows Darby waking up the next morning in the hotel or the motel, and he's just gone. He's left the car, and he just left a note. And it's not even on a bit of paper. He writes it on the mirror or the wall or something like that. That just says that he can't do it, and simultaneously this is both too much and not enough. Which I feel like we could dissect that statement a bit. I don't really want to, but I feel like we could. And that just, further sets up that he just vanished from her life. He just ran away, and that was the end of their relationship. So it's like, okay, this isn't just trauma over someone she cared about dying. This is someone who disappeared, and maybe all the complex feelings that might cause, all the insecurities that might rise up in someone, like this constant worrying that it was something she did, it was her determination or whatever that drove him away, possibly. Whether that's true or not, it makes sense that she would be thinking about stuff like that, right? So we get some gorgeous shots of like Iceland. There's like one road they're driving down after they land the plane, where it's like there's water on both sides of the road, so it just looks really, it looks literally cool because there's snow and stuff, but it just looks really nice. It's actually, Iceland was in the news the last couple of days because there's a lot of earthquakes and there might be an eruption coming, and there's these big fissures like tearing the roads apart. So hopefully everyone in Iceland is going to be okay, because that does not look pleasant. But it was just funny that I was just reading that earlier today, and then I was watching this, and here's Iceland. I don't know if they shot in Iceland, but they definitely had some great looking locations in some of these shots. I imagine all the stuff at the hotel, which is just kind of surrounded by snow and like one hot spring, probably isn't on location in like anywhere, never mind Iceland. It's probably somewhere more control, not necessarily a set, but somewhere where they could, I could be wrong. Maybe they did just shoot all this somewhere where there's actual snow, but that would be my immediate thought, just from a logistics point of view. So we're at the hotel. She gets the fancy ring that unlocks doors. It's got like a little chip in it, and it lets her in where she's supposed to go. Doesn't let her in where she's not supposed to go, of course. So that might become relevant. She talks to the AI voice about what the plan is, and she's got dinner that night with everyone, and she dyes her hair. Blah blah blah. The whole thing. She catches a glimpse of Brit Marling's character, through a door, on the way down to dinner. It's an awkward little moment. Very curious to see how their relationship goes. There's a lot of implications when Clive Owen starts talking at the dinner about how he's invited these key people here because he believes these are the minds that are going to help make the decisions that's going to help save the world, or something to that effect. And he even jokes that the people that his wife Lee invited he doesn't know why they're here. And that's kind of an awkward moment for Darby, because she's kind of realizing that she doesn't really fit into anything he was talking about there, which would imply that Lee invited her. Although I almost want to double bluff that and say that no, I think it is going to turn out that it was him, maybe. That said, though, the big thing is that halfway into the scene, the empty chair across from her at this dinner table, Bill just sits down into it. And it's a really good example of like just the sound leaving the room and her just being in shock that he's sitting there, and she chokes on her drink a little bit, and it's a whole big moment. And I think one of the things I liked about this is that one of the first things that happen once she sort of composes herself is that Clive Owen's son comes up and wants to play doctor. He's got like a little toy stethoscope around his neck. And Bill's just very nice to him and like sort of plays along, and it's kind of sweet, and it's almost like in some ways maybe Darby it would have been easier just to see him be an asshole because he ditched her. But the first thing she sees him doing is being this really nice guy to this little kid. And it's like, hey, we could have had a future together and maybe we'd have a kid by now if he didn't run away. And, you know, she had no say in that. So I think it hits her quite a bit here. And there's a lot of complex emotions on Darby's face as this is as this playing out. But yeah, it's very... this is where I was like, okay, I'm not really sure why they're all here right now. I'm being told it's for one thing, but I'm not convinced that's true. They all go out to the hot springs, but she kind of feels uncomfortable and backs out quite quickly once they start talking about Bill. And Bill comes to see her, though, and asks if she wants to... or she asks him, actually, to go for a drink. He says no, but then says... how about a walk? Which, you know, she's kind of upset that he said no at first, but then smiles. You can't see her smile, but she smiles when he says, no, how about a walk? So they go for a walk, and they're talking, and you can tell that she wants to ask him all these questions, and they kind of bring up some stuff a little bit, but he even says at one point, what's the rush? We've got all week. And I'm like, okay, you're definitely dead. She's not getting those answers from you. There's no way you're living to tell her all the things that she wants to know. But he does. I actually do think this scene's really good. The way he talks about how she was very difficult to be in love with because she may not realize it, but she left him a lot before he left her. But she just doesn't know when or how that happened. And this idea, she didn't literally leave him behind, but in a spiritual sense and in a sort of, you know, a non-physical sense, she did. And that was something that was very tough on him. That's interesting. And she actually asks, you know, why did you come here? And he doesn't give her like the whole reasons, but he says that he's here for Lee. And that answer, of course, surprises her. And it's after this conversation where she actually Googles him and Lee together and gets photos of them hugging and just talking at an art gallery on Google. And it's very... just like you can tell what's going through her head. She's thinking, wait, was Lee having an affair with Bill? Like, how did Bill meet her? Like, you know, all these questions start to sort of go through your head. Like, is that just a happenstance thing? Did Bill go looking for her once he knew who she was? Like, it's a lot of, you know, a lot of questions that I'm sure that'll be looked in at as we go throughout the show. She decides to accept an offer that he made to, you know, go to his room, right? She didn't at first, but she's decided now. It's actually when she puts on her headphones and she plays Shuffle on the iPod, and would you believe it, the same song from earlier plays, and she smiles and she goes, and I'm like, oh god, he's going to be with someone else or something. There's no way this is having a happy ending, her walking to his room. But it worked though, because they introduced that song and it was this bonding moment earlier on, so when it started playing again here, you immediately felt why she was going to go back to him. And she does. And it sounds like he's having sex at first through the door, and she walks away, but then it starts to sound a bit rougher. It sounds like stuff's getting knocked over. It sounds like something bad's happening. She tries knocking on the door, and when she doesn't get an answer, the episode ends when she goes outside to look in at the window to see if she can see what's happening, and Bill is like dying against the glass, his hands like sliding down with the blood, and he's begging her not to leave him alone. And then seemingly he dies, and that is where the episode comes to a close. It's a good. I mean, it's a good ending. Like, the episode's 70 minutes long, but it does so much. It gives you so much background to get you intrigued into the character's backstory, which is still, there's plenty more to explore. It sets up this retreat. It sets up this other cast of characters. So I guess now we could be suspecting any one of them could be a killer. I mean, that's one thing, I suppose, on top of that. But it's a good cliffhanger to actually end with, what is literally the titular murder of the show, I presume anyway. I think that's such a good job of making us care about their relationship, of at least at the very least, feeling something for the fact that Darby clearly not only loves Bill, but has been very conflicted about the fact that he just disappeared one day, and that's left a hole in her. And the idea that it's almost about to be rekindled, or something, there's going to be closure at the very least that she never got before, and then that to be taken away by a murder. I also think it's a subversion of expectations a little bit, because the episode started with Darby saying most bodies that aren't identified are women, and the end of the episode is the murder of a man. I think that's an intentional little try to keep us on our toes kind of idea. But it sets up that Bill even said when they were talking before this scene, when they were outside on the walk, he was sort of admiring her dedication. He talks about loving her book and saying how it helped him understand her a lot better. He used to worry that they were being kind of, just young and stupid and reckless with investigating this stuff. But reading the book sort of really made him realize that, no, she just really cared about no one falling through the cracks. That was the exact phrase they used. But the idea that she didn't want people's murders to go unanswered for. She genuinely cared about making sure everyone got justice of some kind. I think setting that up in your character and then ending the episode with a murder of someone who she cares about makes a lot of sense, because now we know that she is going to care about solving this or stopping whoever it was who did this. I mean, I think the pitfalls here is that if there's if there's a huge obvious connection that they reveal later on between the murders they were investigating in the past and then whatever's going on here now, that might feel a bit cheap and kind of convoluted. So I would probably hope they don't go down that path, but at the same time, it's all about what the connection is and the execution of it. So we'll see. No pun intended, of course, with the execution. Yeah, I really, I'm pretty hooked by the end of this episode. I think it does a good job of building this character that is kind of an outsider, who is kind of a weirdo, who is quiet and keeps to herself, who doesn't feel like she belongs with all these rich people, who is always cared about the people that everyone else forgets and is quite happy to forget. But she's going to be there to be there for them, to solve their crimes, to have a voice for them, even though she seems to have a trouble having a voice for herself. She's very uncomfortable at the start of the episode when she's talking to the book reading crowd. She's very nervous. I mean, people start getting up and leaving as if they don't care in the first few seconds, and I felt bad for her, but at the same time, she's got her hood up, she's got her headphones around her neck. It doesn't, she's kind of getting what she's given out. But then as she actually starts to tell the story, people are drawn in a weird way. I think the audience of the show starts to get drawn in as she's talking. Up until that point, it's all just a bit of flavor, and then that starts to be the real meat of what the show is, or at the very least the meat of the character, before we get to kind of the actual ongoing story that the episode then sets up. Yeah, I mean, I think as far as first episodes go, I think this is really strong. I think it's not quite as ethereal as the other Brit Marling and Zal stuff that I've seen so far, but I could easily see it veering down that path. But I guess the other big theme that I've kind of glossed over up until this point, although I've mentioned a lot of the things that are making me say it now, is that this idea of relying on technology is brought up a lot. In fact, that's something that Clive Owen, when he's talking to the crowd at dinner, even says, some of you who have invited are pioneering tech people who have built AI or built systems or built whatever, and then some of you are against technology or against relying on computers and things like that. That could be an interesting path to go down in this, especially since we've introduced an AI sort of help character who can only be seen through special glasses or through phone lenses and things like that, who isn't there in the real world, which almost just kind of stealthily introduces the idea that we can't necessarily trust everything we see. I mean, for example, who's to say at the window that she's seeing this murder through isn't actually high tech? Who's to say it's not a screen? Who's to say it's not a screen that's adding in something that's not really there? Just like the AI voice, the butler dude in the glasses or on the phone. Like, given that he's built this place out in the middle of Iceland, given how absurdly wealthy he is and how much of a tech guy he is, it wouldn't shock me to get a twist later on where this isn't real and this is just this is all about not trusting technology. And hell, maybe the reason why Darby's here is to see if it can successfully trick someone who looks for the faults, who tries not to let the things fall through the cracks. Maybe this idea is if this, like, to see if she can realize that this isn't real in the first place. I don't know. The idea that both her and Bill have been invited does feel intentional. Whether that was Lee or... I mean, it seems like it's more Lee. I mean, it feels more obvious that it's Lee at this point. I'm just sort of leaving it open that maybe that's a misdirect. But whether it was Lee or Clive Owen's character, like, are they hoping they're going to rekindle? Are they hoping there's going to be a confrontation between the two of them, finally seeing each other again? Are they a case study of some kind for what the real purpose of this whole trip is? Yeah, because also, when I was comparing it to Glass Onion and saying, like, is this all like some elaborate thing where they want Darby to try and solve a murder? I'm not saying it's purely for entertainment. It feels like it may have more of a purpose than that. That said, though, like, she wrote a true crime book, and there's a lot of heart in it and stuff, but maybe there's going to be a critique on the fascination with true crime, and that maybe this is all just entertainment for Clive Owen's character or people that he's invited there. I genuinely, like, I don't know. Like, there's so many avenues this could still go in terms of which themes it wants to hone in even more than it already has. But certainly the gender roles, the technology, and the climate stuff all feel like the big things that the show is talking about so far. And I think the fact that it's given me three big themes, strong characters, made me care about the mystery, and made me care about the relationships, is a very good, strong first outing that I'm very impressed by. So I am looking forward to watching episode 2. Like I say, I imagine I'll have that out on Saturday, just based on the rest of the week's schedule. So either way, though, it'll definitely be out before episode 3 next week, and you can expect these, I imagine, every Wednesday while it's airing. So thank you very much for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and whatnot. Of course, if you're commenting down below, I do always appreciate comments and theories and all that. Obviously, you might have already watched episode 2. If you have, probably hold back on your theories just because you've got more information than I do, and it'll spoil stuff for me and potentially anyone who clicks down there who hasn't watched episode 2 yet. And come back in episode 2's review with the theories so far. But any thoughts on this episode specifically, that scenes or how it handles certain moments? I'm sure there's things I've forgotten about because it was a very dense episode. There was a lot in there. It was a long run time, but it used its time very well. I never felt bad pacing in this, which is something that I think a lot of streaming shows, which this isn't quite a streaming show. It's technically not, even though it's also on Hulu and Disney Plus, depending on where you are. It uses its time well. It feels very well paced. Streaming shows can sometimes feel like they're just being long for long's sake, and to give the element of, like, hey, we're prestigious, so we have to be over 60 minutes. This does not feel like that, especially, and I think probably because it is a 7-episode complete story. The whole thing's probably pretty well paced, I imagine, based on the OA I expect it will be, but yeah, I can't wait to see where it goes and whatnot. But anyway, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, support everything, and I will see you next time. So keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?